Okay, hi everyone, welcome, and let's get started. So today we will switch gears a little bit, and we will have some background on number theory. So just to remind you, what we have done so far is that we started sort of with one-way functions and their variants like one-way permutation. Using that, we were able to construct pseudo-random generators in a black box way. Then we were able to construct pseudo-random functions in a black box way. We kept going, and last time we constructed symmetric key encryption just from these primitives. So primitives like one-way functions or one-way permutations, which might look very weak, it turns out that they are very powerful and they can give you things like PRG and symmetric key encryption, right? But the backbone of the internet is really public key encryption, right? Because symmetric key encryption is only for the parties who can sort of meet, and they can generate a shared secret, and we can communicate only once we have this shared secret, which nobody else knows, right? But for example, let's think about what happens when you open a website. So let's say you open some website, let's say google.com or gmail.com or something like that. You want to check your email, so you would like your emails to be encrypted. So you need to establish a secure connection with google.com, right? Or gmail.com. But you and Gmail, you have never met each other, right? You don't have a shared secret key. So for this reason, we need public key encryption, right? And we will see how public key encryption enables secure communication over the internet. But in public key encryption, very roughly, you can encrypt with the public key, and then there's a separate secret key which will allow you to decrypt messages. So ideally, we would like to sort of continue our previous style, and we would like to build public key encryption just from, let's say, any symmetric key encryption. So that has been a dream for a very long time, but unfortunately, this is still a major open problem. The open problem is, given any symmetric key encryption, can you use it in sort of a black box way and build a public key encryption? So people have tried to solve this problem for the past 30, 40 years. No solutions so far. And in fact, there have even been some negative results. So some negative results which have shown strong evidence that symmetric key encryption does not necessarily imply public key encryption. So in other words, there have been what is known as black box separation results, which show that you cannot take a symmetric key encryption and convert it in the black box way to public key encryption. If you want to build public key encryption, you necessarily need something else. Okay, so that's why today we will look at assumptions like the discrete log assumption. Later on, we will look at the RSA assumption. Just assuming a one-way function or one-way permutation is not going to be enough. At least as of now, we don't know how to build public key encryption from just these assumptions. Okay, so today we will not build public key encryption. Rather, we will just dive into number theory, and we will sort of collect the necessary facts which we will need for the rest of this course. Okay, so number theory background. So first, some notation. We have natural numbers, we have real numbers, and we have z, which is the integers. So natural numbers is just numbers from I think 1 to up to infinity. Then we have real numbers, which we all know what they are. There's a number, then there's a decimal point, then another number. And then we have the set of integers. So integers can be from minus infinity to plus infinity. So -1, 0, 1, and then all the way up to minus infinity here and plus infinity here. So we will just study some very basic properties of numbers, just some math background for today. So, so what is the GCD? Of two numbers A and B. So this is just the greatest integer which sort of divides A and B. Okay. If GCD of A and B is 1, we say that A and B are relatively prime. How do you compute the GCD? It's known as the Euclidean algorithm. It's actually one of the oldest algorithms known to mankind. So Euclidean algorithms, it allows you to compute GCD, and in fact, it's a very efficient algorithm. Not even, of course, it is polynomial time, but it's actually very fast in practice. And in fact, there's also something which is known as the extended Euclidean algorithm, which allows you to compute x comma y such that ax plus by is actually equal to the GCD of A and B. Okay, so for simplicity, for most of this lecture, just assume that the numbers which we are starting with A and B, they are positive and they are integers. So you start with A and B, and extended Euclidean algorithm would allow you to compute integers x and y such that ax plus by is exactly equal to the GCD of A and B. And by the way, here x and y can be negative. And many of you might have taken the 251 course, where I think we actually look at how the Euclidean algorithm works. And this gives you a very nice lemma, which we will use and which we will keep in mind. So the lemma is, if A and B are relatively prime, then that means that ax plus by equals 1, which implies that ax equals 1 mod y. Okay, so when I say, maybe let me write it differently. Ax mod y is 1. Okay, and I'm sure that most of you have seen modular arithmetic. Mod y is just mod y of any number is just you divide that number with y and then you are just left with the remainder. Okay, and here if you take mod y on both sides, then by being a multiple of y just goes away, and the remainder which is left is just at most ax.
Wait, don't you typically want this in terms of mod b?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, mod b. Okay, what this means is that if a and b are relatively prime, then there exists x, which is the inverse of a with respect to mod p. So if you look at this equation, then x can be called as the inverse of a because ax equals just 1. Okay, and this is a very nice observation. So in cryptography, we like to work mod primes, right? And in fact, in cryptography, primes hold a very special importance. And one of the reasons for that is this, that if, for example, let's say b is prime, right? Then every number is relatively prime to b, and hence every number will have an inverse with respect to b. And this is something which we will exploit later on. Another very basic and important fact to keep in mind is what is known as the fundamental theorem of arithmetic. It's a sort of a very grand name, and it says that for every integer n, and again, let's only keep positive integers in mind. All these things can be generalized to negatives, but I don't want to go there right now. There exists pi ei such that pi is not equal to pj, such that n can be represented as follows: pi raised to the power ei. In fact, this representation is unique. So what I'm saying here is that there exists a unique set of prime numbers. You multiply these numbers together, you can use a particular number multiple times, and you will get back the number capital N. Okay, and the reason why it's called the fundamental theorem of arithmetic is, I think, it's in some sense inspired by chemistry. So in chemistry, we see that there are all these fundamental atoms, and basically everything else which we see is made up of these fundamental atoms, all the molecules and compounds and so on. So here we are saying that you look at primes, you can look at primes as these fundamental numbers, and then every other number is just made up by multiplying some subset of primes together. And not only that, in fact, this representation is unique. And just to be more precise, to make sure that this representation is unique, pi must be less than pj for I less than j. Okay, so p1 is the smallest, then p2, and so on, and this essentially this ordered list is unique. Now let's come closer to cryptography. We will recall the notion of groups. Okay, so a set group is essentially a set G with the operation, and this is known as the group operation, by the way. Let's denote it by this dot inside a circle. It takes as input two group elements and outputs another group element. So this set with this operation is called a group, and let's denote it by G comma this operation. If the following four conditions are satisfied, the first condition is closure. For every A and B in G, A group operation B is also in G. Okay, and in fact, this is already sort of implicit in the definition of the group operation. So you pick two elements of the group, you apply the group operation, the result will always continue to belong to the group. The second condition is the existence of identity element. So there must exist an identity element, let's denote it by E, which is an element of this group G, such that for all A in G, A group operation, the identity element equals the identity element operation A equals A itself. So group operation, applying the group operation on the identity element with any other element results in just that other element. Doesn't change the element at all. The third property is associativity. It's a very natural property. For every, now let's start talking about three elements from the group. For every ABC, which is part of the group, let's say I want to apply the group operation on A, B, and C, right? So I have to pick either A and B first or B and C first. So associativity says that it doesn't matter which one you pick first. So associativity just says that A and B and then C equals A, and first you apply B and C. And then finally we have the inverse operation, or rather the existence of an inverse, which says the following. For every element A in G, there exists another element X in G such that A group operation X is equal to X group operation A is equal to the identity element. And we will see various examples of groups. But basically, when you're trying to prove that something is a group, most of the time you need to pay attention to the inverse and the closure property. Identity and associativity, they are typically pretty easy to prove. Okay, so now let's, oh, and by the way, a very natural property is that A group operation B must be the same as B group operation A, but that's an additional property. It is not guaranteed in all groups, so these are called as abelian groups. Which says that A operation B is the same as B operation A for all A and B which are part of the group. Okay, And just to make my life simple, I will just refer to it as multiplication, because typically in cryptography, the group operation will be multiplication mod some number n. But just arbitrary, you can call it addition. You can just call it a group operation. Another thing I want to define is the order of the group, and it's represented by G, and this is the number of elements in the group. Okay, so this is as far as the definition goes. Now let's try to see some examples. So perhaps the simplest example of a group is what is known as Zn, and the group operation will be just addition mod n. Okay, so Zn is just all integers from 0 up to n minus 1. Okay, so all integers smaller than n, but positive or non-negative. And by the way, because this group operation is some variant of addition, this is known as an additive group. If the group operation resembles addition, we call it an additive group. If it resembles multiplication, we will call it a multiplicative group, and so on. But of course, just keep in mind that it's not really just addition or multiplication, it's modular addition or modular multiplication. So let's try to prove that this is a group. So maybe you can help me here. So how do I prove the closure property? So closure property says that if A and B are in Zn, then I want to prove that A plus B mod n is also in Zn. Okay, how do I prove it?
Addition is closed under integers. So you get like a plus b is an integer, and so a plus b mod n is within Zn.
Yeah, so a plus b is an integer, and of course, any integer mod n. So sorry, first a plus b is a positive integer, right? If a and b are integers, could be 0, but at least it's not negative. So a plus b is a non-negative integer, and then it cannot be n or larger than n. So it's clearly an integer from 0 to n minus 1, and all such integers belong to the group Zn. Okay, identity just E equals 0. We don't need any explanation here. Associativity is also just trivial. Then what about inverse? So here the inverse of A, x will just be capital N minus A, right? Because first of all, capital N minus A, it is smaller than n, but yet it is greater than 0.
We have to put in a special case for a equals 0.
Yeah, you are right. So in that case, the inverse of that would just be 0. But I want to make it a little better.
n mod n is
Okay.
0 anyway, so
Let's
it still
just
works.
let's just put mod in here. So now, x, if you add these two, you will exactly get either n or you will get 0. Okay, so this is fine. Any questions? Isn't the integers with addition also a group? Yeah. Yeah, but generally I want to keep the discussion to sort of finite groups because that's what we will use in cryptography. Okay, so this was an additive group, which is typically not very useful. Let's take an example of a multiplicative group. So to do that, let me define something which is known as Zn star. So Zn star is the set of all positive integers less than n and relatively prime 2. Relatively prime to n. Okay, as an example, what is ZP star? So 0 is excluded here because every number is relatively prime to the prime number. It's just 1, 2 all the way up to p minus 1. Okay, and for a more complex number, you basically have to check if the number, you basically have to compute the GCD of every number with n. Yeah, so people are giving nice examples of other groups as well. A lot of other groups, definitely. Okay, so now my claim is that Zn star is essentially a multiplicative group. And again, to prove that, I'll need your help. So the claim is, let's prove it for ZP star. And the operation is just multiplication mod P. This is a group. Okay, so so again, we need to prove 4 properties. So first we have the closure property. So we have that A and B, they are in ZP star. And what is A times B mod P? How do we prove that this is indeed in ZP star? So clearly, A is positive, B is positive, so A times B is also positive. You are taking mod P, so this is clearly also less than P. So we know that A times B is an element of this set, 0, 1 to the power P minus 1. How do we prove that it's not actually 0? If we can prove that it's not 0, then we are done.
Since A and B were not divisible by P in the starting, like when you multiply with them, like the remainder can never be like divisible
Yeah.
by 2.
So this follows from the fundamental theorem of arithmetic. Right, because P does not appear in the representation of either A or B, and hence when you multiply them, it will not appear in the representation of the result either. So A times B is not divisible by P, and hence, cannot be 0 mod P. What is the identity element? E is just 1. Associativity is trivial. And then finally, we have the inverse property. So how do we prove the inverse property?
Extended Euclidean algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. So we already saw the inverse property. We will rely on the fact that P is a prime, and hence with respect to P, every element will have an inverse. So this is just extended Euclidean algorithm. So we saw here this fact, right? If A and B are relatively prime, then there exists an X such that AX equals 1 mod B, and B is basically P here. So A will be relatively prime to P, and hence there exists an X such that AX equals 1. So this is good. And in fact, we can even generalize it, although we will not do it right now. For any n, Zn star and multiplication mod n is a group. And let me leave this as an exercise. Try to extend the closure and the inverse property for this. So now a very important general property of groups. So this is, let me simply refer to it as a general property of any group. So suppose we have some element A in the group G. Then what we have is A to the power some number K is equal to actually A to the power K mod the order of the group. Okay, and by the way, what does this mean, A to the power K? This is just A group operation A, just K times. Okay, by default, we will think of the group operation as some kind of multiplication, modular multiplication, but more formally, it's just the group operation with itself. This property is very, very useful to keep in mind. I will not prove it if you have taken 251. This follows from the order theorem. Okay, so now this property gives us several interesting things. First, it shows that for every A in G, A to the power G is actually equal to 1. And by the way, here 1 is the identity element. And we can even define an order of an element. So order of an element is the smallest k such that A to the power k equals 1. Okay, and note that order of the element is at most the order of the group. But it is possible that you pick some smaller element, and so there's a smaller k for which a to the power k is 1. And the order theorem says that k in fact evenly divides order of the group. So k is either the order of the group. If it is smaller than the order of the group, then it evenly divides the order of the group. Another corollary of this fact is that if order of the group is a prime, then k must in fact be equal to the prime, because no other number less than the prime divides the prime. So now a very natural question is, how do we compute the order? Sometimes it's completely trivial, like what is the order of Zn? Order of Zn is just n, 0 to n minus 1. What is the order of Zn star? That's sort of less clear. Okay, so typically order of the group can be computed by considering the what is known as the Euler's phi function. Euler's phi function is also known as the Euler's totient function, and Euler's phi function is just phi of n equals p to the power I raised to the power ei minus 1 times pi minus 1. This is all for all I, and assuming that n equals just the usual representation from the fundamental theorem of arithmetic. So if m equals this, then phi n equals this. What is phi n? Phi n is the number of positive integers relatively prime to n. Okay, and this implies that the order of Zn star is actually equal to phi of n. Okay, any questions?
Should we put a less than n in the definition of phi n as well?
Sorry?
Of positive integers less than n?
Yeah. Good point. The proof of this is actually not very hard. You just need to consider. So here we have these several primes pi's, and you just need to leave out the numbers which are just some multiples of pi for all I. But I'll skip the proof here. So now we have this. From this, there are several things that follow. So first is what is known as Fermat's little theorem. Fermat's little theorem just says that for a prime P, this is the usual representation for denoting the set of all primes. For any element A in, let's say, ZP star, A to the power P minus 1 is actually equal to 1. And this whole equation is mod P. So sometimes rather than writing mod P here on the left side, I just write it after the equation to denote that both sides are actually taken mod P. It's the residue mod P. So how do we prove this? How do we prove that A to the power P minus 1 is 1? This actually directly follows from the general property, because the order of this group is just P minus 1. This can be computed from the Euler's phi function. In fact, it can even be trivially computed, because ZP star is just 1, 2, 3 up to P minus 1. So we have P minus 1 elements. So order of ZP star is just P minus 1, and hence we have that A to the power P minus 1 is just 1. And this follows from the general property, right? General property says that yeah, this one. The A to the power order of the group is just 1. There's also a sort of simple generalization, which is known as just Euler's generalization. And in fact, I think this is the context in which the phi function was introduced. For any number n, not necessarily a prime, for any A in Zn star now, A to the power phi of n is equal to 1 mod n. And why? Again, because phi of n is the order of Zn star. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, good. Okay, so we have talked about the general property of groups. We have talked about the order of the group. There's something which is very nice about prime order groups. Why do we want our group to be prime order? For that, let's come back to this general property, right? If you think about the exponent, it's really the exponent mod the order of the group. If the order of the group is prime, that means that it's really K mod prime, right? And we like to work modulus a prime. We like to work mod prime because there exists an inverse of sort of every number mod prime. Okay, so at least in the exponent, if we have mod prime, that means that in the exponent there would exist an inverse of K. So this might be vague right now, but we will see very nice applications of this fact later on. Okay, this means that essentially I give you A to the power K, there exists another number K inverse. You can raise it to the power K inverse. K and K will cancel out, you will get back A. And such type of inverses can be useful. So that's why we like to consider prime order groups. Now, an example, a very simple example of a prime order group is ZP.
So if K and K inverse cancel out, will we get identity, or Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah,
In the
you will get
power, okay.
identity, which is 1. So you will
Okay.
get back A.
Okay.
So this is a good example of a prime order group. A non-example, and this is a very common point of confusion, ZP star. And the multiplication mod P. This is not an example of a prime order group. The reason for this is that the order of ZP star is P minus 1 because we exclude 0. Okay, so this is an additive prime order group. What we would really like is a multiplicative prime order group. Now the question is, do we have any examples of multiplicative prime order groups? How might one construct a multiplicative prime order group? So that's what we will ask right now. So it's far from trivial to construct a multiplicative prime order group. You can take ZP star, you can take another number, Zn star, right? Zn star, the order of Zn star looks something like this. It's not a prime at all.
Do Z3 star.
Sorry?
We could do Z3 star.
You can do what?
Z3 star.
Z3 star. So Z3 star, what is the order of Z3 star? Isn't the order of Z3 star 2?
Yeah, prime.
Oh, 2 is a prime? Okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So Z3 star is typically not useful in cryptography because we want our prime to be very large, but nonetheless, good point. So here's our quest, right? We would like a multiplicative prime order group. And to do that, pick a prime P such that P equals 2Q plus 1, where Q is also a prime. Okay. And by the way, these type of primes are known as Sophie-Germain primes. And let's see, what's an example of a prime like this? I think 7 would be an example, right? Because 7 is just 2 times 3 plus 1. But we are looking for numbers, primes much bigger than 7. And now we will define our group as follows. Let's call this group ZQ. And this is equal to X square mod P such that X is in ZP star. Okay. So you look at ZP star, there are 2n elements. You take the square of all of these elements. That gives you ZQ. And the idea is that if many of these squares are the same, then the order of ZQ might actually be lower than the order of ZP star. Okay, and our hope is that, of course, not only it is lower, it is actually a prime. So let's try to prove that this is a prime order group. Now my claim is that ZQ is a prime order group. And in fact, I will make a more specific claim. The order of GQ is actually equal to Q. And keep in mind that what is the order of ZP star? The order of ZP star is actually 2Q, right? Because it's P minus 1 and P minus 1 is 2Q. So let's try to prove this claim. So observation 1 is that order of GQ is actually at most Q. Okay, why is that? Because consider an element X in ZP star and P minus X, which is of course also in ZP star. My claim is that X square equals P minus X square mod P. So note that GQ consists of all the elements squared mod P. Okay. Now I am picking two different elements from ZP star such that their squares are the same. Okay. This means that order of GQ is at least a factor of 2 less than order of ZP star. And this is easy because what is P minus Q square? This is P square plus Q square minus 2P X. And when you take it mod P, this is a multiple of P, this is a multiple of P. So what I'm left with is just X square. Okay. And by the way, this X square mod P is known as the quadratic residue of X. Now I have the remaining part. The remaining part is I have to prove that for any, let's call it X and Y in ZP star, if X square equals Y square mod P, then in fact this implies that either X equals Y or X equals P minus what? Let me say it, Y equals P minus X. And if I can prove this, then I'm done. Then I'm essentially proving that you look at X square, there are exactly two elements in ZP star which map to X square. Okay. And this is easy to prove. I look at X square equals Y square. This implies that X square minus Y square equals 0 mod P. This implies that X minus Y times X plus Y is 0 mod P. This implies that either X equals Y mod P or X equals minus Y mod P, and minus Y is the same as P minus Y. I was writing it Y equals minus X mod p, and by the way, minus x is the same as p minus x mod p. Okay, so this sort of completes the proof. There are exactly two elements in this larger group CP star, which map to the same element in GQ, and hence the order of GQ is exactly half of the order of ZP star, and you know, this means the order of GQ is exactly Q. And by the way, I have sort of skipped the part where we prove that another claim, let me just write it down, is that GQ is actually a group, right? We sort of forgot about that, but this is not so hard. Let me not get into that. Okay, so good. So now we have a very nice example of a prime order multiplicative group. You can choose P and Q to be as large as you want. And with large numbers, we have a shot of doing something in cryptography.
Sir, how is it to find P and Q like this? Like if I because you have to do the primality test always. Like, so how is it like? How is it? It is like for finding large P and Q that satisfy these properties, or is it like very direct?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the algorithm which we use in practice is just sort of pick a random prime Q and then just test that 2Q plus 1 is also a prime. And I think this works well in practice. I don't know the exact complexity, the exact running time of the algorithm. Yeah, I don't know the exact density of these type of primes. But we can look up the density of Sophie-Germain primes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, now a really nice concept, which makes me like groups a lot. So yeah, there's a comment, then the density of primes under n is asymptotically n by log n. But here we are talking about density of Sophie-Germain primes, not just primes. So this is not enough. What is a group generator? So typically this is denoted by a little g. So this is called a generator if take g, you take g square, g cube, you keep going. And finally you have g to the power group of g to the power order of the group. This whole set is actually g. So you took a single element and you were able to generate the entire group using just the single element and the group operation. Okay. So the name, that's the reason why we call it a generator. Now, do there exist generators? There's another comment. Yeah, the Wikipedia has the density of Sophie-Germain primes. So yeah, it's not much lower than just the density of primes. Right. So do there exist generators? If so, how difficult is it to find them? Or is there an algorithm to find generators? So it's an amazing fact. If order of G is a prime, then every element of this group is actually a generator, except the identity element. Every non-identity element of G is a generator. This is easy to prove. Why? Because again, we will use the order theorem. We will prove, so we have that the order of every group evenly divides, the order of every element evenly divides the order of the group. Okay. So if A is in G, it implies that the order of A is either 1 or in fact it's the same as the order of the group, right? If the order of A is 1, then basically A is the identity element. If the order of the group is G, this means order of A is G. This means that A is a generator. Okay. And why should A be a generator if its order is equal to the order of the group? Right? Because so here you can see. I start with A, I take A square, and so on. Then at some point, the element will start repeating. So at some point, either I will generate the whole group or I will get back A again. If I get back A again, then that means that order of A. So if A is seen again, this implies that order of A is actually less than the order of the group, but that cannot happen in a prime order group because the order must evenly divide the order of the group. Okay, so just a proof sketch. So that's why generators are so nice. You can take any element, you multiply it by itself, you do modular exponentiation, and you can generate basically the whole group using that, which is actually what makes the discrete log problem so hard, which is what we will come to. So now let me describe to you 3 different problems, and that's really the takeaway of this lecture. These are problems which are considered to be hard to solve in probabilistic polynomial time, and we will try to build crypto systems like public key encryption and so on from these problems. Everything that we have done before today has been based on just the factoring problem. So the discrete log, it's let me call it an assumption. The discrete log assumption is that solving the discrete log problem is hard. So let's say GQ is a prime order multiplicative group, and G in GQ is a generator, which means it's not an identity, it's not the identity element. Then for every PPT adversary A, the following task is hard. Probability that A is given G to the power X and A has to compute X such that X is sampled at random. So what should be the space from which X is sampled? This is actually ZQ. And I'll come to why this is the case. So this is just negligible in Q. Okay. Now, why are we talking about ZQ, right? We had ZP, ZP star, then we had GQ. Now, the order of GQ, as we have seen, is just Q. Hence, any exponent is mod Q, right? Which means that any exponent comes from the following set: 0, 1 up to Q minus 1, which is exactly equal to ZQ. So this is essentially the only list of unique exponents. As soon as you go beyond Q minus 1, you can reduce the exponent mod Q, and then you will again fall back into this set. Okay, so this is an important problem to keep in mind. Any questions? So a couple of things to note. The discrete log assumption is or, not is, but is thought to be, is thought to hold in some special groups. And there's a whole community of researchers which are just focused on trying to look at different natural groups and trying to see if discrete log can be broken in these groups. So there's a bunch of groups in which discrete log is not thought to hold. Another bunch where we think it holds, we have good confidence. So just saying that GQ is a multiplicative prime order group, Q is large, that may or may not be enough. In fact, there are even additive groups where discrete log might hold, and so on. So our assumption for the class will be that, yeah, there exist some groups where discrete log holds, and hence we will just use those to build everything. Now, another question which I want to ask is, let me give you another note and observation, is that f of x equals g to the power x mod q, where g is from GQ and x is from ZQ, is a one-way function. Based on the discrete log assumption. So this directly follows. Actually, maybe this doesn't directly follow, because here I'm asking for the exact same x. So this in some sense requires a small proof. The observation here is that fx is a one-to-one function. Okay, and then we'll be done. Now, why is fx a one-to-one function? Any thoughts on that? And this follows from the fact that little g is a generator of the group. But what is the precise argument here?
So if it was not one-to-one, then like there will be a like what do you say, some k such that g power k equal to g itself, and then that k will divide the order of the group. But we know that can't happen because the order of the group is prime.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So proof, say we have x and y, they're both in ZQ such that g to the power x equals g to the power y mod p actually. So by the way, this is not mod q. The group operation is all mod p. And let me actually not write this, right? Because anyway, what do we mean by g to the power x? It means g times g, where times is the group operation. So we don't need to explicitly write this modulus. So if this happens, that means that g to the power x minus y is actually 1. This also means that g to the power x minus y plus 1 is actually g. What this means is that x minus y plus 1 must at least be q, which in turn would imply it's greater than or equal to or just greater than. It's actually equal to. Equal to some multiple of let me just call it k times q. So this essentially means, actually no, should be just x minus y is a multiple of k times q, which actually means that x equals y mod q. So if they both belong to ZQ, that means that they are the same element. Okay, because G must first generate the entire group before we see any collisions. And now it follows that this is also a proof of this, because if A can find X, that means that A has sort of inverted the one-way function. But if A cannot find X, that means that if it is a one-to-one function, it's also a one-way function. Okay, so this observation plus the discrete log assumption should give us the fact that this is a one-to-one one-way function. Because if A can invert g to the power x, that means you get x prime, which must be equal to x by the one-to-one property, which means that you have actually broken the discrete log assumption. Okay, any questions? So there are two more assumptions to go through, the DDH assumption and the CDH assumption. Okay, so let's write down the other two assumptions. So first is known as the computational Diffie-Hellman assumption. And we will just call it the CDH assumption. So there was this very nice seminal work of Diffie and Hellman in 1976. They basically introduced the notion of public key cryptography. They introduced digital signatures, key exchange, and so on. And the assumption comes from that paper. So it's a variant of the discrete log assumption. So here again, GQ is a prime order group. And it should be a multiplicative prime order group, in fact. Then the following is hard. So now the adversary is given through two different group elements, g to the power x and g to the power y. Okay, adversary doesn't have to compute x or y. Adversary just has to compute g to the power x, y. And here x and y are sampled uniformly again from ZQ. And what we want is this probability to be negligible in Q. Okay, so given g to the power x and g to the power y, how can you compute g to the power x, y? It's completely unclear because, of course, we know that g to the power x times g to the power y is actually g to the power x plus y. So multiplying the exponent, it's a difficult operation. We don't know of any good algorithms for that. One option to solve this problem is A tries to solve the discrete log problem, right? A can try to compute x or A can try to compute y. If A is successful with either, say A has, let's say x, then A can just output g to the power y to the power x, and then A is successful, right? But otherwise, what is the option that you have? It's less clear. So this is not to say that if you cannot solve the discrete log problem, you cannot solve the CDH problem, right? There might be other ways. There might be some other direct, yet to be discovered algorithms for sort of multiplying the exponents. We don't know, right? So something to keep in mind is that if discrete log problem is hard, CDH may or may not be hard, right? But if the discrete log problem is easy, then CDH for sure is easy, which means that CDH essentially assumes something extra on top of the discrete log assumption. So we will say that CDH assumption is actually a stronger assumption than the discrete log assumption. Okay, stronger assumption is you're making something, you're assuming something very strong. So so in cryptography, of course, we prefer weaker assumptions. The weaker your assumption is, the more mild it is, it's more likely to be true. Then finally, we will look at the decisional Diffie-Hellman problem. Decisional Diffie-Hellman assumption. And it's called the DDH assumption as well. Okay. So this assumption is very similar to the CDH assumption, except that now the adversary might even be given g to the power xy, and still the adversary cannot distinguish it from a random group element. So in more detail, again, GQ is a prime order group. And now let's talk about two different distributions. Okay, so we will express it in terms of computational indistinguishability, but you can write it in terms of prediction as well. So here the first distribution is g to the power x, g to the power y, and g to the power xy, such that x and y are sampled from ZQ. This should be computationally indistinguishable from g to the power x, g to the power y, and let's call it g to the power z. So here, or let's call it r. Okay. Here x, y, and r are sampled from ZQ. We need these two distributions to be computationally indistinguishable with respect to any PPT adversary. So what this is saying is that computing g to the power xy is so hard that not only you cannot compute it, but even when given the correct answer, you cannot distinguish the correct answer from some random answer or some random group element. So again, DDH assumption is stronger than the CDH assumption, right? If you can solve the CDH assumption, or if you can solve the CDH problem, then you can just compute g to the power xy, and then obviously you can distinguish it from a random group element. But even if you cannot solve the CDH problem, maybe there are algorithms to solve the DDH problem. And in fact, there are some groups where we do know that DDH is easy, although we still believe that CDH is hard. But there are other groups where we believe that DDH is also hard.
So in general, the discrete log assumption is hard to solve because like the infinite series that we have for the log x function, that does not apply in the group that we have talked about. Is that the reason that it is so tough to find out the log of g to the power of x?
Yeah, log behaves very differently in the modular arithmetic world.
Also, just as a detail, all of these negligible in Q, is that intended to mean like negligible in the length of Q or like in log Q essentially?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, yeah, because like if I guess a random one, okay, yeah.
Isn't Q itself a number? Like why can't it just be negligible of Q? Like Q is also a number, right?
Because then I'd have a 1 over Q chance of guessing it if I just like picked a random X, which is not negligible.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in general, you really want to look at the length of the input. Because if Q is exponentially large, right, then negligible in Q might still be a very large number. Any other questions? So maybe the last comment is that CDH and DDH problems, they are very nice because they have a lot of structure. If you look at the factoring problem, maybe it doesn't have so much structure, right? I give you some number n and you just have to factor it. Here, if I give you g to the power x, it has a lot of structure in the sense that I can raise it to another power, I can do some operations, and we will see all of these things next time. So a lot more cryptographic primitives are based on the discrete log assumption and its variants compared to the factoring assumption and its variants. Okay, so we will stop here.